Welcome to today's deep dive. So I want you to just picture your living room right now. Suddenly, this tiny, impossibly fluffy blur just shoots across the rug.
Oh yeah, the classic indoor sprint.
Right. It spins in a tight circle, barks at literally nothing outside the window, leaps toward the couch, and then just tears back across the floor.
It's quite the spectacle, honestly.
It really is. I mean, if you share your life with a Pomeranian or, well, really any highly active toy breed, you know this exact routine. It looks completely weightless, like a little spinning storm cloud just tearing through the house.
It is, it's a super captivating performance. You see that burst of motion, the agility, the sheer confidence, and the visual is just so overwhelming that it becomes, incredibly easy to forget the actual physical reality of the biological machine you're looking at.
And that disconnect is exactly our mission today. We are exploring the really intense and honestly often counterintuitive intersection of size, biomechanics, and canine psychology.
Because the scale changes everything.
Exactly. So whether you own one of these micro-size athletes or you're just, intensely curious about how physical scale completely rewires the rules of animal health, this deep dive is going to dismantle a lot of assumptions.
A lot of them.
Because we're talking about an animal that possesses what is essentially this ancient working dog energy, but it's entirely trapped inside a delicate, decorative frame.
Yeah, and to really understand that tension, we have to define what that working dog energy actually is. I mean, the Pomeranian is a spitz breed.
Right.
And when we talk about spitz dogs, we are historically talking about animals engineered for harsh northern climates, grueling labor. So think Siberian Huskies, Alaskan Malamutes, Samoyeds.
Are big guys pulling sleds?
Exactly. These are dogs bred to pull heavy sleds through the snow for miles upon miles or herd reindeer across frozen tundra. They are completely hardwired for endurance, hypervigilance, and, problem solving.
But then we shrank them.
We did. Over centuries, humans selectively bred the Pomeranian down from those rugged, medium-sized ancestors into a toy companion. So we shrank the chassis, but we left the massive, high-revving engine completely intact.
Which, that creates a massive friction, right, between what the dog's brain demands and what its tiny skeleton can actually safely endure.
Huge friction.
So we want to figure out how to give a dog like this what the source calls a scaled life. Because it seems like owners tend to fall into two pretty dangerous extremes here.
Right. The porcelain figurine versus the invincible athlete.
Yeah. Either we treat them like fragile decorations that only exist to sit on silk pillows, or we see them doing those wild indoor sprints and just assume they're practically invincible.
And neither of those extremes respects the actual animal. To build a scaled life, we have to bridge the gap between their psychological drive and their real physiological limits.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, the absolute first barrier to doing that is getting an accurate read on the physical condition of the dog, which brings us to the unique camouflage of the double coat.
Okay, let's unpack this camouflage, because it severely distorts our perception. The best way I can conceptualize a Pomeranian's coat is that it's like a human wearing an oversized, heavy-duty Arctic winter parka.
That is the perfect analogy.
Right, because if I'm standing in front of you wearing a massive puffer jacket, you have absolutely zero idea what my underlying fitness level is.
None at all.
I could be an Olympic weightlifter, or I could be actively losing muscle mass and gaining dangerous amounts of visceral fat. From the outside, my silhouette remains exactly the same.
What's fascinating here is how that parka analogy perfectly illustrates the real danger. Because in a larger, short-haired breed, say a boxer or a greyhound, a 2-pound weight gain is visually obvious immediately.
Oh yeah, you see the waist thicken right away.
Exactly. The ribs disappear under a layer of fat. But with the Pomeranian, 2 pounds is often a 20 or even 30% increase in total body mass.
Wait, 30%?
Yeah, that is a catastrophic amount of proportional weight to gain, but it is completely swallowed up by the fluff. They just look, a little more round.
And round means cute to us.
That's the problem. Human neurology is hardwired to look at a small, round, fluffy creature and interpret it as cute, not clinically obese.
We see a teddy bear, not a joint crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the mechanics of why that extra weight is so devastating, because we aren't just talking about aesthetics here.
No, not at all. We are talking about sheer mechanical failure, specifically in the knees. Toy breeds are genetically predisposed to a condition called luxating patellas.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in a structurally sound knee, The patella, which is the kneecap, rides smoothly up and down inside this deep groove at the base of the femur.
Right.
But in many microbreeds, that groove is incredibly shallow. So when you add 20% more body weight to that tiny frame, the biomechanical force of every single step or jump pulls that kneecap entirely out of its shallow groove.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it slips out of place, causing pain, cartilage damage, and eventually severe arthritis.
And you have to add that to the strain on their cardiovascular system too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a tiny heart and tiny lungs now have to oxygenate a significantly larger mass of tissue.
Exactly, which drastically reduces their heat tolerance and their stamina.
So if I can't trust my eyes because of the coat, my instinct is just to, put it on a scale once a month. But a scale just gives you a total number. It doesn't differentiate between a dense, well-muscled dog and a dog carrying pure fat.
Right.
So do you just have to get your hands in there and feel around?
Relying on touch is completely non-negotiable. You have to bypass the visual entirely. You need to physically part that thick double coat and look straight down from above to confirm there is an anatomical waistline tucked behind the ribs.
So you really have to dig past the fluff.
You do. And furthermore, you need to run your hands lightly along the rib cage. You should be able to feel the individual ribs without having to apply deep pressure.
So if it feels squishy,
If you have to press hard through a layer of squish just to find a rib, that dog is overweight. It's highly recommended to have a veterinarian physically place your hands on the dog during an exam just to calibrate your sense of what an ideal body condition actually feels like.
okay, so let's say we do that calibration and we realize, oh no, the dog is overweight. The natural human reaction is to want to fix it immediately, right? Cut the calories in half, put them on a doggy treadmill.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Right. With a biological system, this small, drastic changes seem incredibly risky.
Sudden caloric restriction in a microbreed can actually lead to dangerous drops in blood sugar or hypoglycemia, which can cause seizures. Weight loss must be agonizingly slow and mathematically precise.
Like down to the gram.
Exactly. We are talking about weighing their kibble on a digital kitchen scale, counting the exact caloric value of every single treat, completely eliminating random table scraps, and implementing very gradual, sustained increases in activity.
Let's transition to that activity piece, actually, because this is where a lot of standard dog training advice seems to contradict basic intuition.
How so?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to argue in favor of the living room sprint for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I go to the gym, jump on a treadmill, and sprint until my heart rate is completely maxed out, I am doing high-intensity cardiovascular work. So when a Pomeranian does zoomies, banking off the sofa, sprinting down the hallway, panting heavily, their heart rate is up.
Yep, it definitely is.
They were burning calories.
Yeah.
So biologically speaking, why doesn't that check the exercise box? Why isn't a physical sprint enough? Does sniffing a bush really count as exercise compared to that?
It's a compelling argument, I'll give you that, because physical exhaustion does mimic satisfaction. Zoomies absolutely burn kinetic energy and they elevate the heart rate, but we have to separate cardiovascular exertion from neurological enrichment.
The brain versus the body.
Exactly. Remember the spitz brain we discussed earlier? The sled dog trapped in the tiny body?
Right, the huge engine.
If you only use physical sprinting to exhaust a working breed brain, you aren't satisfying their psychological drive at all. You are simply conditioning a fitter, faster, more hyperactive athlete. They will recover from that sprint in 20 minutes and demand more.
You are basically building a tiny marathon runner who just needs a longer marathon tomorrow.
Which is exactly the opposite of what you actually want. To truly tire them out, you have to engage the olfactory bulb.
The nose.
Yes! A dog's brain dedicates a remarkably large percentage of its total volume to processing smells. I mean, they have hundreds of millions of olfactory receptors compared to our 5 or 6 million.
Well, it's just wild to think about.
So when a dog stops to sniff a tree, they aren't just registering a pleasant scent. They are decoding a dense chemical bulletin board. They are analyzing the age, sex, health, and stress levels of every other animal that passed by.
Wow.
For a dog, processing scent is the neurological equivalent of a human trying to solve advanced calculus while translating a foreign language.
That completely reframes the entire concept of a walk. So taking them outside isn't about the step count at all. It's about letting them stand there and do that complex calculus.
Exactly.
That deep mental processing taxes their central nervous system in a way that running mindless circles simply cannot achieve. It provides, a holistic exhaustion.
And this distinction is particularly vital when we look at the mechanics of puppies versus adults. With puppies, forced physical exercise like marching them for 2 miles on concrete is structurally dangerous.
Because of the growth plates, right?
Yes, growth plates are these areas of soft, developing cartilage tissue at the ends of long bones in a puppy's legs. And because this tissue hasn't ossified or hardened into solid bone yet, repetitive, high-impact movement literally crushes those soft zones.
Ouch.
Yeah, it can cause microfractures and permanent angular deformities in the legs. So for puppies, owners really need to watch for fatigue. Unstructured play, gentle exploration, and intense mental sniffing are the only safe avenues.
Okay. But as they mature into adults, their skeletal structure hardens and they can handle sustained walking.
Right.
And a healthy adult Pomeranian can thrive perfectly well living in a small apartment. But I guess the trap is thinking that a small square footage equals a small need for engagement.
That's a huge misconception.
Because the static environment of a living room offers zero novel olfactory calculus. The smells just don't change. So they still require structured, mentally demanding excursions into the outside world.
Definitely. And you can supplement that indoors by challenging their spitz instincts too. Hide their daily food ration in small puzzles around the room, practice recall and obedience commands down a long hallway, force them to focus, problem solve, and really use their nose.
But managing their exercise indoors brings up a whole different set of mechanical challenges. I mean, even just navigating a standard house presents wild physics problems for a micro-sized dog.
The scale issue again.
Right. Think about the relative scale.
Yeah.
We watch a Pomeranian hop off a standard couch and trot into the kitchen, and it looks completely effortless. But relative to their skeletal size, that distance is enormous. It is the equivalent of a human jumping off a second-story balcony directly onto their feet multiple times a day.
It's jarring when you put it like that.
Yeah.
And the cumulative toll of that impact is staggering. While a single jump might not cause an acute break, thousands of jumps over several years cause micro-traumas to the cartilage, accelerating the arthritis and patellar luxation we discussed earlier.
Which means mitigating these household risks is a core component of a scaled life.
Absolutely.
Like putting down rugs on slick surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Because watching a small dog scramble on hardwood or tile isn't just a funny traction issue. It's a biomechanical hazard.
Oh, it really is.
They're constantly micro-straining their stabilizing muscles just to stay upright. It's like a human forced to walk on an ice rink all day. And stairs present a very similar hazard.
Stairs demand active supervision or physical barriers like baby gates. A slip on a hardwood stair for a 6-pound dog is a catastrophic fall. And because dogs are inherently stoic predators who naturally hide their pain, owners frequently miss the subtle signs that a soft tissue injury has even occurred during one of those minor slips.
So you really have to become an astute observer of their gait. You aren't just looking for a dramatic limp. You are watching for them occasionally, like skipping a step with a back leg or doing a subtle bunny hop when they speed up.
Yes, those tiny hesitations.
If they hesitate before jumping onto a surface they usually clear easily, that is a massive red flag. And the mandate here is clear. Never attempt to self-diagnose joint issues. You always see a vet, because they need to manipulate the joint to actually feel for crepitus or instability.
Right. And that physical vulnerability extends directly to how we physically tether them when we do take them out for those olfactory walks. Which brings us to a major debate in the small dog world, the collar versus the harness.
Oh yeah. A lot of owners assume that just buying a high-end harness instantly solves all leash-pulling problems.
Well, a well-fitted harness is an excellent tool because it redirects kinetic force across the chest and shoulders, entirely bypassing the neck. And protecting the neck of a toy breed is paramount because of their respiratory anatomy.
Because they're so delicate.
Exactly. Toy breeds are incredibly susceptible to a condition called collapsing trachea.
Let's dive into the mechanics of that, actually, because the honking cough is a sound a lot of small dog owners are sadly very familiar with.
Yeah, it's tough to hear. So the trachea, or windpipe, is a flexible tube held open by C-shaped rings of cartilage. In many toy breeds, those cartilage rings are just genetically weak. Over time, or under the pressure of a collar being pulled, those rings degrade and flatten out.
Okay.
Imagine trying to breathe through a plastic drinking straw and someone pinches the middle of the straw flat. That is essentially what is happening in the dog's airway.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. The honking cough is the sound of air literally forcing its way through that collapsed, flattened tube.
Which means, if your dog is making that sound, simply switching from a collar to a harness is just putting a bandage on a structural failure. I mean, the harness prevents further external crushing, but it doesn't repair the degraded cartilage. That requires an actual vet check and medical intervention.
Exactly. You can't just switch gear and ignore the cough.
And it also highlights why a harness doesn't replace actual leash training. If the dog is still throwing its full body weight against the end of a harness to get to a squirrel, you still have a massive behavioral issue, and you are still putting structural stress on their tiny shoulders.
Right. You are managing the mechanics of their joints and airway on the leash, but the moment you step outside that front door, you subject that tiny biological engine to a completely different overarching stressor, which is ambient temperature.
Let's dismantle the weather myths here, starting with a cold.
Yeah.
Because there is this universal assumption that because a Pomeranian has a thick double layer of fur, they are practically immune to winter.
People think they're invincible in the snow.
Right. They look like tiny Arctic wolves, so they must love the snow.
Yeah. Well, the coat certainly provides insulation, but the physics of their size completely overrides the insulation. We have to look at their surface area to volume ratio.
Okay, explain that.
Think of it like a tiny espresso cup filled with hot coffee compared to a massive industrial coffee urn.
I like this analogy.
The espresso cup has a huge amount of surface area exposed to the air relative to the tiny volume of liquid inside, so it goes freezing cold in 10 minutes. But the giant urn stays hot all morning.
So a Pomeranian is the espresso cup.
Exactly. They have a massive amount of surface area relative to their internal metabolic mass. They bleed core body heat to a cold environment incredibly fast.
Wow.
They simply do not possess the internal volume to act as a furnace. So in wet, windy, or freezing conditions, putting a thermal coat or a winter sweater on a Pomeranian is not just an absurd fashion choice. It is a vital thermodynamic tool to prevent hypothermia.
And the inverse is equally dangerous in the summer.
Right.
You have that thick insulating layer trapping heat against a tiny body that is already struggling with a compromised airway.
Yes, the heat is brutal for them.
Because dogs don't sweat like humans do. They thermoregulate by panting, exchanging hot air from their lungs for cooler outside air. But if the outside air is hot and their trachea is narrow, their cooling mechanism is highly inefficient.
Which means walking them on hot pavement in the afternoon is a fast track to heat stroke.
Yeah.
You have to actively seek shade, walk in the early mornings, and constantly monitor their respiration rate.
Okay, so we have outlined this incredibly complex management system. We're measuring their food to the gram. We are substituting cardiovascular sprints for deep olfactory calculus. We are buying rugs to prevent joint microtraumas, and we are monitoring the thermodynamics of the weather.
It sounds like a full-time job.
Right. And yet, despite doing all of this perfectly, an owner might sit on the couch at 8 p.m., look at their dog, and the dog is still pacing.
Oh, yes.
They're barking at shadows, chasing the cat, relentlessly demanding attention. And the immediate, logical human response is just, I didn't do enough. They have too much energy. I need to take them for another walk. I need to throw the ball 50 more times.
The guilt kicks in.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? Are we inadvertently creating adrenaline junkies out of our pets by constantly escalating the activity level when they act restless?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the ultimate trap. When we constantly escalate activity in response to pacing or barking, we are completely misinterpreting the dog's nervous system. There is a profound biological difference between a genuine need for physical exertion and a state of chronic overarousal.
Meaning their sympathetic nervous system, their fight or flight reflex, is essentially stuck in the on position.
Precisely. That frantic, endless energy isn't a request for a longer walk. It is an inability to neurologically downregulate. Think back to their spitz ancestry.
The sled dogs.
Right. These brains were designed to constantly scan a hostile, frozen horizon for threats or commands.
Yeah.
If you constantly stimulate them, their brain floods with cortisol and adrenaline. They lose the ability to access their parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode.
So how do you fix it? Because you can't just ignore a dog that is barking in your face.
Well, active alert breeds actually have to be systematically taught how to settle.
Wait, you have to teach them to rest.
Yes. Rest is an active skill for them, not just the absence of movement. You have to enforce downtime. You use tools like a quiet crate, a dedicated placemat, or a chew toy that requires slow, methodical licking, which actually releases endorphins and naturally lowers their heart rate.
Oh, that makes sense.
You have to help their brain transition from the high alert spitz mode back into baseline calm. Understimulated palms act out via barking and chasing movement, sure, but mental work helps that emotional regulation.
It's about cultivating emotional regulation, not just physical exhaustion. And the overarching philosophy behind Balancing all of this, the diet, the sniff walks, the joint care, and the enforced rest, is summarized in the text by a really brilliant concept: fitness as freedom.
Fitness as freedom perfectly captures the goal of a scaled life.
Huh.
We're not trying to biohack a toy dog into an elite triathlete. A lean, mentally enriched, structurally protected Pomeranian is simply an animal that possesses the freedom to age comfortably. They have the physical capability to explore the woods without tearing a ligament, the metabolic health to breathe easily on a summer evening, and the neurological balance to sleep deeply at night, unburdened by anxiety.
Which brings us to the end of today's journey. We started by stripping away the illusion of the fluff camouflage, realizing that visual cuteness often hides devastating structural weight.
We really had to look past the surface.
We challenged the dogma of the indoor sprint, discovering that true exhaustion actually comes from the deep neurochemistry of a scent walk. We navigated the sheer physical hazards of existing in a giant's world, protecting fragile tracheas, safeguarding knees from high-impact drops, and respecting the thermodynamics of a tiny body in extreme weather.
It's a lot of physics.
It really is. And finally, we confronted the paradox of overarousal, learning that enforcing a state of rest is just as vital as providing stimulation.
This deep dive really challenges how quickly we accept surface appearances. It is a perfect case study in looking past the presentation to understand the underlying mechanics.
And I want you, listening right now, to reflect on how that applies outside the world of animal biology. How often in our own lives do we look at the external fluff, the curated appearance of a situation, a project, or even a person, and completely mistake it for their internal structural reality? It is incredibly easy to see a confident, fast-moving blur and assume everything underneath is functioning perfectly.
The visual presentation is almost never the whole truth.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've spent a lot of time discussing the tension of the spitz energy trapped in the toy frame. We're looking at a creature carrying the ancient, rugged, hardwired instincts of an Arctic working dog, completely masked by an artificially bred, delicate body.
A huge paradox.
So if you really sit and think about it, how much of a modern toy dog's daily anxiety, that relentless barking, pacing, and eroticism, is simply the agonizing friction of a wild, capable brain realizing it is forever confined by the physical limitations of a decorative shell? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things that seem simple on the surface and never forget to look underneath the fluff.